When Russia seized the Crimean Peninsula without a fight in 2014, it was widely celebrated as Vladimir Putin's highest geopolitical achievement. 8 years later, that same territory became the secure rear base that made the invasion of southern Ukraine possible. Moscow poured cash into the peninsula to lock down their control. They built a $4 billion bridge connecting it to the mainland and spent billions more covering the region in new military bases, airfields, and naval infrastructure. For Ukraine, reversing this occupation presented a massive physical problem. A traditional ground invasion to retake a territory armed this heavily is practically impossible. Early attempts to disrupt the supply lines relied on brute force. A truck bomb in 2022 and naval drones in 2023 both blew up a section of the main bridge, but the damage was limited. Road traffic was disrupted, but trains kept rolling and the supplies kept flowing. Direct assaults hadn't permanently broken the supply lines, so by May of 2024, the Ukrainian military pivoted. Since a traditional ground assault was off the table, they focused on a strategy of total isolation, the logistics lockdown. To understand why this works, you have to look at the map. Crimea is naturally almost an island, separated from the European continent by the Sivash, a sprawling labyrinth of shallow lagoons and wetlands that armies and heavy cargo simply cannot cross. That leaves only 3 narrow strips of land firm enough to actually support heavy roads and railways: the Parakoth Isthmus in the west, Chongar in the center, and the Arabat Spit in the east. To exploit these 3 tiny choke points, Ukraine needed range and precision. They found it by pairing Starlink satellite networks with US-made AI-powered mid-range explosive drones. By April, swarms of these new drones began systematically hunting Russian fuel and ammunition trucks along the R-280 highway, which runs through Melitopol and directly into those geographic choke points. The route became so lethal that the Ukrainians started calling it the Highway of Death. This combination of restrictive geography and advanced drone surveillance effectively forces Russian military cargo into highly predictable, incredibly vulnerable funnels. In June, the drone campaign ramped up significantly. Strikes crippled the bridges at Chongar and the Arabat Spit, forcing heavy Russian trucks off the pavement and onto flimsy pontoon alternatives. Then Ukraine targeted the sea routes. They hit 3 out of the 5 Russian vehicle ferries operating in the Kerch Strait, effectively shutting down maritime deliveries from the mainland. When you knock out a direct bridge and force a detour through a secondary checkpoint, you extend a truck supply route by an additional 80 to 100 kilometers. This chart shows the mathematical reality of that delay. Adding that specific extra mileage reduces the total volume of supplies a single truck can deliver in a day by exactly 30%. A sudden drop in cargo capacity of that size instantly degrades combat power. Fewer fuel and ammo deliveries means the Russian army is physically capable of mounting fewer assaults along the northern front lines. The mathematical toll of this blockade soon bled directly from the military supply routes into the streets of Crimea's major cities. By mid-May, gasoline rationing created lines at the pump lasting up to 8 hours. A few weeks later, occupation authorities took extreme measures, temporarily banning all fuel sales to civilians to reserve whatever was left exclusively for the military. Without fuel for power generation, secondary systems failed. Street lights went dark, water pumps shut down, and authorities mandated the closure of public transportation and local shops by the early evening. This total system breakdown occurred right at the start of the crucial summer tourism season. Millions of mainland Russians usually flock to the peninsula's beaches, but tourist bookings plummeted by 50% in June alone, severely damaging the local economy. On June 26th, after officials declared a formal state of emergency, thousands of residents and tourists tried to flee at once. It triggered a 15-kilometer-long traffic jam leading back to the Russian mainland. The systematic targeting of fuel and transport doesn't just hinder the military, it makes the peninsula's occupation much harder to sustain. By making Crimea increasingly unlivable for civilians and unviable for troops, Ukraine is building the kind of leverage that would be central to any future negotiations over the region.